Hello, bonsoir, and welcome back to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Adam White, Rich Allen, and Jeremy Smith. While we have no destination on where you can watch Ligue 1 football in the UK this season, we're still here to serve you up all the French football news you can stomach. And tonight's season preview is a real buffet of brilliance and bloated hopes ahead of the 2018-19 campaign. But before we begin, here's a quick rundown of the latest news. Paris Saint-Germain retained the Trophée de Champion by putting 4 past Monaco in Shenzhen, China last night. Angel Di Maria scored either side of strikes from Christopher Nkunku, and Timothy Weah scoring his first professional goal to claim the first silverware of the season. In transfer news, Nantes president Vladimir Keita confirmed that the club have bought in 3 loan signings: Matt Miazga from Chelsea, Majid Waris from Porto, and Gabriel Bachelier from Monaco. Elsewhere, Saint-Etienne are also close to making Remy Cabella's loan a permanent transfer, with a deal of €7 million plus bonuses on the table for Marseille, while Wolfsburg have agreed a deal with Montpellier fullback Jérôme Roussillon, according to Ligue. And that's all for now. But to keep up to date with everything in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening where else but the champions Paris Saint-Germain, which comparatively to last summer at least, it's been a little bit of a quiet one. There's a new manager, there's a new goalkeeper. But Adam, the question is, with those additions, have they done enough to push into Europe and push themselves further in the Champions League?
Well, that's going to be the question that dominates so much of the season, at least sort of towards the top end of French football. I think for PSG that a lot of things need to change for them to challenge in the top end of European competition. We've seen over the last few seasons that is a club with an ingrained set of sort of dysfunctionality, if you like. You look at the transfer policy being extremely top heavy. You spend 400 million on 2 players to cover positions that you're already pretty well stocked in, when the rest of the squad sort of is a little bit worse aware. Seems a bit ridiculous. Not really using their youth academy, their youth system at all, really, to bring through players. Okay, Kimpembe and Rabiot too, that have appeared recently, and the runaway player power are all things they need to overcome. So I'm not necessarily sure that further additions this window would be the key necessarily to changing any of their fortunes. I think it's those 3 main issues that are alongside sort of more well-rounded squad that needs to be addressed. I think Thomas Tuchel, though, is a step in the right direction, given that he's a manager that is perhaps associated with clubs that are going to have a little bit more of the sort of the project mentality, which is something that PSG need, is to build and not look for immediate success and sort of build towards something. And he's certainly a manager that would look to do that. And I think he's going to be more tactically diverse, and he's going to have more sort of interesting and new ideas about the way they're going to play, which I think, given the way they've been very one-dimensional since the QSI era started, under all 3-4 managers, they've played basically exactly the same way without really changing anything, even when it went wrong. So I think Thomas Tuchel is the man to change that, potentially, if he's given the time. But there are a number of issues that need to be sorted out aside from necessarily bringing in new faces. But they looked absolutely brilliant yesterday in comparison to Monaco, who were very much off colour. So I think it's going to be an interesting season for PSG, but for me it needs to be a little bit more longer term if they're going to really challenge at the top of European competition.
Yeah, and it was nice to see the mix of Weah and Nkunku in the side, with obviously still some players recovering from the World Cup. But Jez, they've done some business this summer, and the big one obviously is Gigi Buffon coming in goal. Vast experience from the Italian, but they've also lost a few players. Yuri Bechiche's gone to Athletic Bilbao. Javier Pastore's finally left to go to Roma. Thiago Motta has essentially retired and is already finding himself back in the notebook as early as possible in his new role, at least. But what do you think to the deals they have managed to do? Obviously, it's not been as spectacular as last summer, but good start at least for getting some experience in him and shifting out some of the dead weight.
In terms of some of those that have left, I think they've done pretty well at sort of recouping a decent amount of money, which is obviously going to be important with FFP in mind. And Pastore, just it was a pity. He's kind of a cult hero at PSG, but just because of injuries, he never quite fulfilled his potential. Bashish, I feel a little bit sorry for him. He's obviously not the best of left backs, but I think he did a really good job for PSG. I think he deservedly pushed Kurzawa out of the team by the end of the season. I just think they've been very hamstrung by what they did last summer, which I still think was ridiculous. But it's still a decent enough squad. Obviously, the main name is Champions League, and possibly it's still a little bit lightweight for that. But for Ligue 1 purposes, it's certainly more than strong enough. And if pre-season is anything to go by, which it isn't necessarily, but pre-season and the match yesterday, Tuchel is prepared to blood quite a few of these youngsters. And again, yesterday is basically just a glorified pre-season friendly, but they have all been showing that given the chance, they do have a lot of ability and can do something special. There's also players like Diaby who did well in the European Championship as well. So I still expect them to have a good season. I still don't expect them to win the Champions League, but I'm sort of more excited than usual about seeing what they come up with, just because I think there's the potential to play better football. There's the potential to see more youngsters coming through, and in Buffon, it can go either way. I mean, I think it's the same kind of thing as Alves and some of these other players that have been brought in. I don't think it's very clever thinking from the PSG management. I think it's it's a big star, big old star. Let's bring him in. But I think Buffon is different to people like Alves in that I think he's a lot more mature, a lot more sensible, a lot more of a sort of leader of men, and the kind of person that a lot of the team will feed off. And I think whereas to me it was players like Alves who destroyed the team spirit last year, I think Buffon's the kind of person who can actually build it. The only person who might disagree there is Areola, who completely undeservedly is probably going to be pushed to the bench.
And as long as he doesn't find anyone with rubbish hearts, at least anyway, he might be all right. Rich, I want to talk about Thomas Tuchel as well, because that's really the big move of the summer for PSG. Obviously, bringing in a new man, they want to get them further in the Champions League. We saw him in action in a way for the first time last night, and like Jess said, blooded in a few youngsters. Is there positives to take from the German in both in his style and the fact that he's maybe trying to add some depth by bringing in some of these young players as well?
I'm holding my breath slightly on the bleeding of the young players, because we saw that. We've seen that in numerous pre-seasons with PSG. It wasn't that long ago that Jean-Kevin Augustin was looking fantastic, and we all thought, great, he's going to get his opportunity for PSG, and then really struggled to find any first-team football. So I think the jury's still out on that. Yes, it is. We can't deny that it's great to see some of those PSG youngsters being given a go in pre-season and actually shining as well, especially in the game yesterday. I think moving to the three at the back, I think will work for this PSG team. It highlights, I think some transfers still need to be done. If they are going to be playing three at the back, I have no particular issue with it being Marquinhos, Kimpembe, and Thiago Silva. But of course, who then have you got as cover? Jerome Boateng was the player that they were looking at bringing in. Whether that meant then that someone like Kimpembe wasn't going to get as much game time, I see that as a more backward step. We know what a good player Kimpembe is, but they need those new faces. They need to build to that squad if they're to challenge seriously for the Champions League this season. I don't think Tuchel yet has fully addressed the defensive midfield concern as well. They're still relying on players either playing out of position or Lassana Diarra, which is neither as the answer for Champions League success. But it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how Tuchel can manage. Once Neymar and Mbappe, that's the key dynamic, I think, this season. If Tuchel can work those two together to almost set up a little mini rivalry almost between them within the team, if he can ignite that and push for them to compete against each other to be the best player for the team, great. What he then can't do is let their egos fly perhaps even more off the scale than some of them already are. He hasn't got form for that. He has got a bit of discipline about him, but we know that discipline doesn't necessarily work at PSG unless you've got the authority from those further up the chain. So if he has, great, and I do see this as a move that will work out for all parties. But I think we need to sort of give it a few games, I think, just to see what that dynamic will be between coach, player, and ultimately then the board as well, and see actually how much rein have they given Tuchel to morph this team into his team, because as we know, previous incumbents in that coaching role at PSG, that's not been the case.
And it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic extends with the egos there. They're ever growing, it seems, at least. But favourites to win the league quite comfortably, but how they do in Europe will be the big factor. On to things to a side that's really struggled last season, and the worry, Adam, is that they might struggle again this season. Toulouse have changed their badge, which is a really nice change, actually, to be fair. But they've also gone back in time with bringing Alan Casanova back in as manager. They've lost a few players this summer. Issa Diop and Alban Lafont, the two youngsters, have exited for, at least on the goalkeeper front, maybe a little bit less than they wanted to. They've brought in a few. Mumbele Lea Seika used to be at Marseille, but didn't really pull up many trees there. Dosavi, not a bad signing, but does it feel like they've took one step forward and two steps back this summer?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, because it's sort of been an evolving situation at Toulouse this summer. When I heard that Alan Casanova was coming back to take over, I basically relegated them as soon as I heard that. I thought that was a terrible move. I know that he was very good in his original spell at the club and at the start, but he really trailed off towards the end, and he was sort of sacked with them in danger of being relegated. And of course, Domiera Badje saved them, and then exactly the same thing happened with him a year later. And they were close to being relegated, and Depraz came in and saved them, and it kind of happened with him just 2 seasons later, and they've been sort of the perpetual sort of spiral downwards. And with Diop and Lafont going, who were the sort of backbone of their team last season, with other senior players really falling short of the mark, Annie Delors in particular, and obviously Gianni and Bueller as well had a terrible season really by what was expected of him. I thought that was kind of it, but I think the squad has evolved in a way that makes sense for the team, and in that, even though they've lost two of the better players and the more marketable players and players that were going to make them the most money, which makes sense, they've covered other deficiencies in the team, and I feel like that. I'm really excited to see Manu Garcia play consistently in the league, and I think he could be a really interesting signing for them in central midfield. And I really like the signing of Dosevi. He was fantastic for Metz last season, and I was quite. I can't remember exactly how many, but he's quite happy in the assist rankings, even though he was playing for a side that was stranded at the bottom of the league. And between him and Nolan Roux, they sort of put together most of Met's points last season, and I think he's a really, really good signing for them. And one that sort of slipped under the radar as well, which could be really interesting, is John Bostock, who was very good. It sounds silly to English fans, perhaps, given his reputation, but he was very good at Lens in Ligue 2, and didn't really work out in Turkey. But I think those three players amount to creativity, which since Oscar Trejo left season before last now, who was basically their entire creative outlet, those three could really sort of team up together and create chances for this team. And keeping Max Gradel on board as well is a big coup too. So I think, although I'm not 100% sure about Casanova's management, I think the squad is actually looking okay, and I think Rene's a decent replacement for Lafont too. So I think they'll be actually better than last season. It just depends on whether Casanova can avoid sort of letting the squad get the better of him, and if maybe avoid some sort of weak management and sort of be a bit more tactically astute than I would have expected him to. But I think there's potential there. It's just whether those two things marry up, Casanova and the new signings, whether they can sort of gel. But I think there's actually potential this season. So positives for Toulouse, despite losing their two best players before the window.
And that's the thing, they look a little bit more rounded maybe, and with other teams losing players and not bringing in as many, it'd be interesting to see if they can do something, because a team that might struggle this season, Rich, who had an excellent season last season under Mikel de Zakarian, is Montpellier. It looks like we mentioned in the news, that they might be losing Roussillon. They've already lost Nordi Mukiele early this summer to RB Leipzig. Incomings, Mollet from Metz, who did okay but had injury issues. Andy Delors coming in on loan from Toulouse as well, who struggled but has done okay in Ligue 1 in the past. But at the same time, given that the squad's a year older, especially someone like Hilton, who was such a standout, do you start to worry that maybe the success of last season, losing those couple of players, might sort of destabilise them?
I think it could. I really do. I don't think to a degree of where they need to be fearing relegation, but I think this is probably going to be a sort of lower league, lower table finish to the season about them. I mean, yet again, we're going into another season where they are relying upon Hilton, and it seems it's a bit of an ongoing joke. And there are so many fans of him, but it is slightly ridiculous that they are having to continue to rely on him and seem unable to just let the poor man go into retirement year on year. They seem to be giving him these year-long contract extensions, but I'm concerned that defence won't be as good as last season. Losing Mukiele who was a key part of that defence. Losing Roussillon, as it seems that they will, another key part of that defence. That exposes them, whether they're playing 4 at the back or 3 at the back. I think losing players of that calibre really does expose them, and potentially exposes Hilton for the weaknesses that a 40-odd-year-old naturally has. And with that, I think then comes into effect that they still haven't solved the goal-scoring issues. Andy Delors, I don't think is the man to fill that void. It's been a couple of years now since we've seen him really at his best when he was at Caen prior to his move to Mexico. Casimir Ninger obviously moved on. Prior to that unfortunate lengthy injury, looks a real prospect. Things perhaps just haven't quite worked out for him since he's come back from injury. He's moved on to Caen. So I have concerns with Montpellier. They've kept a couple of players that potentially can rescue them, but I fear this season is a season where their year in year out sort of lack of goals is not going to be helped out by a rock solid defence, and with that, I think you're probably looking sort of lower half of the table as a finish for them.
Yeah, and with the creativity that Roussillon brings as well, they've still got maybe Skiri in the middle that's decent, but they need someone to create something, and then someone to be on the end of it. It's going to be maybe an uphill battle for De Zakarian this season compared to last. On to our runners-up last season in Monaco, and they look completely different again, Jez. They've obviously allowed Thomas Lemar and Fabinho and Moutinho to go. The Gazal deal seems very, very close to Leicester as well, if it's not already confirmed. They've brought some players in, most of them between the sort of 16 to 18 range, really. The standouts being sort of Golovin, Alou from Strasbourg, and Pierre Gabriel from Saint-Etienne, of the slightly more aged players, but not quite that much really. Samuel Gonsier as well, obviously, who we saw last night. What do you think to this new Monaco side? Are they good enough to maintain that second spot, or are they going to face some real challenge this season?
I think, for the last 3-4 years now, it's been clear that the big star of that squad is Jardim. Obviously, they've had some excellent players during that time, but he's the one that this project of buying young and cheap, selling sort of accomplished and expensive, entirely relies on Jardim and the amazing job he's bringing through these bringing through these youngsters. I was surprised that he signed on for another year. I really thought that at times during the back end of last season, it just felt like it was kind of the end of an era for some of the players, but also for him. He gives fantastic interviews, and he gave one at the end of the season basically saying, why would I leave? I'm in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've got a good salary. My chairman likes me. One of the best clubs in Europe, etc., which kind of makes sense. But then in the last couple of days, he's also given an interview which was betraying a few frustrations about this project and the way that he completely has to rebuild every year. It just feels that in previous years there at least has been a little bit of a spine there that he can build the team around, and that for the most part, the young players that he was bringing through, they weren't too young. They all had a little bit of experience. The fact that this year, they're starting with probably the most experienced central midfielder is Aulu, who's not particularly young, but has only got 1 year's top flight experience behind him, I think says a lot. I think Moutinho was looking a little bit past it last year. I think Fabinho wasn't at his best, but they had Fabinho and Moutinho there, who, although Fabinho is relatively young as well, both of them have already been there and done that. It just feels like this year it may be that the Monaco authorities have given him a little bit too much to do. Glick is starting to look quite slow at the back. And as you said, most of the players they're bringing in are 16 to 18-year-olds who I'm sure have got amazing potential, and I'm sure Jardim will be able to get the best out of them. But with the best will in the world, they're kids, and it's a huge ask for him to bring them through. It may be that by the end of the season he's got them playing some great football again, but it could well be also that by the time they're doing that, it's just too late to really put in any kind of challenge, not even for the title, but even for the top three. I feel sorry for him, and again, I'm sort of looking forward to what he can do with these players, but I'm not convinced that they can. I've got a feeling that there's at least 3 teams that are going to be stronger than them over the course of the season.
And it's interesting that the Portuguese man wasn't linked with more jobs, Adam. But looking at some of the players they've brought in, Alexander Golovin obviously impressed during the World Cup, and was interesting. Teams like Chelsea as well. So that was a really good pickup for them. It maybe rounded out some positions a little bit more. Gabriel's very exciting. There's a lot of speaks on William Goebbels, but at the same time, this does feel like a hard reset for Monaco this season that may, at least in the short term, be a bit of a backfire.
Yeah, I think like a sort of hard reset is a good way to look at it, because Monaco are a club that work in cycles. Jardim has talked about it many times. So has Vadim Vasiliev, the vice president, who's sort of the main man. And this feels like the start of a new cycle, given what they do is they sort of, as we've seen, buy sort of younger players and develop them and build them up until there's an eventual sort of crescendo of success. And that was winning the title 2 years ago. And previously, the previous cycle ended when they got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League and sort of had Abdenor in the team and a few others. And they'd sold on, obviously, lots of players at the end of that window, and they sort of start again. It's kind of the model that they've made a success of. And given how successful they were in winning the league title, making the semi-finals of the Champions League, there's sort of a structured end to that latest cycle, in that so many players went. Mbappe and friends went last summer, and Fabinho and Lamar stayed, and that was to sort of continue the success that's expected of them, which is to make the Champions League, and as much as they can, and that sort of sustains them sort of money-wise a little bit, and keeps them almost in the shop window, if you like, a little bit. But now that entire team that won the league, pretty much, apart from sort of some of the defensive players, Sidibe will probably go to, has moved on. And so this team is at the beginning of its life. So you look at players like Hulu, who I like. I thought he was okay for spells, maybe against PSG, and I think he was very good for Strasbourg last year. Golovin's only 22. And even you look at those players like Pellegrini and Goebbels and a few others. They're a team that will be good, hopefully. The plan is maybe next season or even the season after. So it's going to be difficult for Monaco this season, but they're thinking medium to long term rather than success necessarily this season. As long as they make the top 3, that'll be their aim. Then that will count as a successful season for them, given the stage of this cycle. So it'd be interesting to see how those players develop. Tielemans, a lot expected of him as well. Pele is another one they sort of scouted from Portugal. It's gone very well in the past with players like Fabinho. So it's a developing team, and it's exciting to see how they get on. And Jardim is a master of putting together a team and finding a way to win. And he's done it in a number of different ways, and we might see yet another different way to win Ligue and games this season from the squad that he's got at his disposal. So developing, but it would be exciting to see how far they get this year. But don't expect anything from them in the next 18 months, because it's a team that is going to take a long time to develop to its full potential.
That's the crucial bit, isn't it, Rich? That third is the goal, and that's going to rely on not necessarily the players coming in, other than someone like Golovin and Alou as well. It's going to rely maybe more on those players that came in last summer. We're thinking the Tillemans, Keita Balde as well, the players we expected a little bit more from last season. The reason why they were so successful in that Champions League season was that those sort of players that were young and stayed on managed to rise to the occasion. Is that going to be the difference between them having a successful season and not this season? Of those players that were bought last campaign rising up to the occasion?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that front. I think Tielemans is certainly one that should be earmarked for an improved season. I think we very slowly started to see it towards the end of the season. There was certainly a noticeable improvement, but was still perhaps well off where we hoped he would be. We've got obviously Ronnie Lopez, who had such a fantastic season last season. They'll be looking for him to carry that on, because I'd imagine he is one of those players that's earmarked for a summer 2019 big money departure, maybe back to Man City, who knows. But I think what I've seen this summer, I think, is a noticeable change. I mean, it's the same policy, but they're now targeting much younger players. Whereas, in seasons gone by, it was that sort of 18 to 21 bracket. We saw in January with Pellegrini. We've now seen with William Goebbels from Lyon. We saw with Wilson Isidore and Sofiane Diop from Rennes. They're now targeting that sort of 16 to 18 bracket. Whether that's the pressure to continue producing these great players and the fact that the market is changing and a 20 million 18 to 21 year old is now a 40 million 18 to 21 year old, and previously what was someone like Anthony Martial, for example, bought him from Lyon for 5 million. If they went for a similar player, as they're now finding with the likes of Pellegrini, they're now being quoted 20 million. So maybe that's having a factor to it. But, that age group has taken a noticeable shift to the younger. Now, I think the flip side with that, of course, is you're looking at a longer maturity period for those players to perhaps come good to the point then that they are sold off. So I think, as Adam pointed out there, I think you need to perhaps give this Monaco team a little bit longer than we would ordinarily have given Monaco teams where there have been wholesale summer changes. Saying that, we've had wholesale summer changes before, and we've said the same thing. We've said, oh, well, they're going to need time to settle in. They may find themselves just falling off the pace slightly, and we've been proven wrong. So, by no means is this counting them out of the running for a top 3 place. But I think you look at what the likes of certainly Lyon, as we'll come on to later, have done, and how close they pushed them last year. I think you're looking at maybe second place isn't the sort of sewn up position that they perhaps would hope it is, and it may be a little bit more tense of a season for them in terms of securing Champions League football. Because I know they sort of blew it in the Champions League last season, but that's the goal that keeps perpetuating this plan. Is if you can continue to have Champions League football on offer, you're going to be able to beat the likes of a lot of other teams who can look at also approaching these younger players. So it will be a tough season, I think, for them. I think it's going to be tougher than certainly it has been recently for Monaco and for Jardine. But I still think that they will get the job done in terms of Champions League qualification. I think there's enough quality in that team. There's still enough experienced players. As you say, the players that have been brought in the last couple of transfer windows, they've had a chance to sort of bed themselves in. And, of course, just the natural talent of some of those players they bought this summer. Golovin, fantastic player. Fully expect him to be drafted straight into that first team. And I'm sure will play a significant part this season. It'll be an exciting one to see. Just from a Monaco perspective, it might be a little bit more nervy than they'd perhaps been used to.
Yeah, they're going to be a real wild card this season, and it's going to be interesting to see how this team blends as they get on this season. Onto a side that really struggled last season, surprisingly, really, but eventually saved themselves in Lille. Jez, they've brought in the policy felt like it would be after the DNCG that they eventually cleared them, that they maybe be a bit more secure. But they have gone for the bigger names again, but it's maybe a bit more of a mix of experience and youth this time. They've lost Amadou and Bissouma, but in come Loic Remy, Joseph Font, Jonathan Bamba, Ikone from Paris Saint-Germain. What do you think to this side? Have they done enough, given that they're now under Galtier again, and they have some of the young players that slowly grew at the very end of last season, at least, that they may be more of a safe mid-table side this season?
I think they should be safer than last year. I think under Galtier's, more or less the exact opposite of Bielsa in terms of, to be fair, in terms of entertaining football, but also in terms of sort of sanity and security. I think the fact that they're basically going to have a full season with him rather than a completely dysfunctional first couple of months and then sort of firefighting for the rest of the season will make a big difference. I'm hoping that the fans will help as well. I think they really didn't help the club and the young players that for the most part were forming Lille's team last year at all. So I think, a bit more stability from last year should help. In terms of the team, I think first of all, it probably goes for a hell of a lot of the teams we're discussing today, but a lot depends on who's still there at the end of the transfer window. There's, in the last few days, there's been lots of talk about Pepe possibly moving, and I've changed my tune a lot on him. This time last year, I didn't rate him much at all, but I thought he had an excellent season. I think Pepe, Bamba, and Remy up front have the potential to form a really sort of devastating trio. I think they're all extremely talented. Remy, I think, it's partly injuries, but I don't think he's done himself any favors in his career the last 3-4 years or so. But I still think he's a talented striker on his day. So the three of them could cause some damage. It would take Galtier changing his philosophy, which has also always been a little bit more on the defensive side. And that said, it's the defence that, to me, is a little bit more of a worry. I think Amadou in defence and Bissouma in midfield are quite big losses. So I still don't think it's a particularly, this time last year, the Lille bosses were talking about, European places. I can't see this team challenging for Europe at all, but I think they're going to be comfortably mid-table. I don't think they'll have any of the sort of jitters that they had last year. And I think it's still a good opportunity for a few younger players to kind of make their way into the first team and start establishing themselves.
And it's going to be really interesting to see how they end up. Last season, we were so confident that they would finish sort of European places, and they completely imploded. Is this one going to be a safe one? Are they maybe going to go even higher with some of the talent that they have? Or are they going to implode again? Wait and see. There's certainly a team to keep an eye on, because you never really know. On to Dijon, who had an excellent season, really last season, surpassed all kinds of expectations, really. Adam, with the size of the squad and budget, they've added a bit more experience and craft in Yohan Gourcuff. They've obviously, we mentioned earlier, lost Baptiste René, though, in goal. Can they establish themselves now as a Ligue side, almost much like a Guingamp did a few years ago, or are you worried that maybe last season was a bit of a fluke?
It's an interesting question, because I think, first of all, that is 100% their aim to establish themselves as you would expect as a league and club. It's difficult to know whether they might find this season that their sort of philosophy that Olivier Delalio has implemented of open attacking football, whether that gets found out or not this year, and teams having seen them for a whole season and having significant resources to draw upon in terms of video and in terms of having played them before and know exactly what they're about, whether they can be easily stopped, and that if that's the case, then they could be quite easily found out and find themselves in trouble again. If you look at the record from last season, they were 5th in the league in terms of home record. So we talked a lot about on the pod about how good they were at home. So that's they're going to have to rely on that home form again and continue to play that open attacking football. And get those wins that would have been perhaps draws in previous seasons. And even if you look at the final table, the gap in points wasn't necessarily too big to the relegation fight. So drop a few of those wins at home, and suddenly they're back in trouble. In terms of the squad, it's very much the kind of the same as it was last year, with a few obvious additions. Johan Gorkov is obviously a really interesting signing. Struggled a little bit at Rennes expectedly for fitness, and it's obviously been a huge problem throughout his career. But talent-wise, he could be a potentially brilliant signing if they can get him playing regularly, and they can keep him in the team and get something close to his best form out of him. Whether that's possible or not for Gorkov anymore at 32 remains to be seen, and he may sort of drift in and out of the team and not add too much. And whether he suits that sort of waspish kind of midfield they had last season with City and Said and Kwan in particular, Samaritano, or whether he just acts as kind of a focal point as an attacking midfielder to play off Tavares, and whether either of those things would work with Gorkov in the team remain to be seen too. So depends if they can implement him or not, or whether he's worth implementing as a talisman, sort of an attacking talisman. It will be key to their season. But I think that they can still be relatively positive about the season ahead, given how good they were last year, and especially at home. And they're an exciting side to watch, and they're sort of a credit to Ligue in a number of ways, given that they play a little bit differently to perhaps other sides in their position, and they are capable of scoring goals. Tavares, is I think got 13 goals last season in the league, and they've got goals in midfield, which for a team in their position is huge, given the way that a lot of sides in the bottom third of this league really struggle to score goals and don't have a genuine goal scorer. Dijon do, so that's a huge tick in their favour. But Gorkov would be interesting signing, but whether they can maintain the same sort of surprise aspect, if you like, of their open style, it will be the key for them this year.
Can they keep that home form? That's still going to be the big question. They were so bad away from home last season that really helped them, but emulating that's going to be real. I have a bit of a feeling that Dijon may really, really struggle. On to Lyon now, who had a interesting summer, to say the least. Jez, there was the will he, won't there with Fekir. It looks like he's possibly going to stay now and even sign a new contract. Other than that, a lot of very minimal moves, ones we already knew about. Leo Dubois coming in on a free for none. Martin Terrier being a pretty interesting return loan from Strasbourg as well. They lost Diakabe to Valencia, so there's a little bit of a hole there. Have they done enough business this summer to really push on and challenge for that second place spot behind Paris Saint-Germain, or do they maybe need a couple more before the window ends?
I'm a little bit torn. I think the fact that they've, for the most part, managed to keep their squad together, and also, obviously Fekir is the crucial one there, puts them in a good position. I think Dubois is a good addition. I think Terrier's had a fantastic pre-season, and if he gets chances, he's already proved that he's very capable of scoring in Ligue 1. He's capable of sort of shouldering the burden of a big team behind him, which he's done for France's under-21s as well. So I think they've got a reasonable squad to put up a good challenge in Ligue 1, certainly for second place, and possibly to just give PSG a couple of frights along the way, and also maintain a bit of a European challenge as well. The one position I really think that they need to strengthen, and I don't think they've made any secret that's the area where they're looking is at centre back. I still think that's a little bit of a problem position for them. The fact that Morel, who I think is a little bit underrated, I think he gets a little bit too much abuse, but he's not really a natural centre back. And then Marcelo was okay last year, but also I don't think of the highest quality. I think they need to reinforce in that position. But other than that, I'm looking forward to them. A couple of the youngsters, Goebbels has gone, and there's talk of Malida leaving. But I think it's time for a couple more of the youngsters to step up. I think we'll see more of Gouiri this year. I think we might even see more of Fekir's younger brother Yacine, who is sort of close to making the first team squad. So I still think there's going to be a lot of good football. Maybe to an extent it depends on where the heads of certain strikers are at. Memphis is the obvious one, possibly Diaz as well. But I think that with the the retention of Fekir, assuming he stays. I don't have many days left for any English teams to sign him anyway. And with the couple of reinforcements they've got, I'm confident. But yeah, I really think they need to bring in at least one decent centre back.
And that's the rumours, isn't it? That Yerry Mina looks like he may be closing in on Everton now this evening, but at the same time, it also looks like Lyon are willing to break the bank for Ruben Diaz, which is a place they need to strengthen. Rich, it's good that they've kept so many players and so many have stayed out the limelight. We thought maybe Depay might be looking at a few clubs, but there's been no movement on him after an excellent sort of a final third of the season. They still have so much talent. Jez pulling out yet more names that we'll have to keep an eye out again. It seems like every season for Ligue that seems to happen. But at the same time, is there still some worries over Bruno Genesio? He did finish the season very well, but there were still question marks throughout the season. Has he proven enough that he's good enough to take them to the next level this season?
I think he does. I think he gets a lot of unfair stick. I think there's a lot of it is directed at he's perhaps a bit too cautious, a bit too stubborn. Well, he identified last season that they needed to change formation, moved them to the 4-4-2 with the diamond four in midfield, and the team noticeably improved. And he recognised that, and he implemented that change. I think what he's done with that squad, which is a consistent top 4 spot and probably a consistent top 3 spot, actually, if we go back over the years, it's fantastic. I don't know what necessarily more can be expected. They're not in a position where they're going to be a direct challenger to PSG. They're not in the position that Monaco, for example, were in when they've done it in the past. They've done it once, but that was when they had the likes of Titi, Tolisso, Lacazette all on top form within the team. That time may very well come again. They have some really exciting young players coming through, but they need to give him time. I don't think particularly the players have any issue with him. He's a Lyon man. He's been with the squad in various roles for a number of years. And yeah, I just think it seems to be primarily the Lyon fans that give him the stick. And I just think, it's the old, grass isn't always as green. And there are many clubs, I think, in this division who can vouch for that. So I think they need to perhaps cut him a little bit of slack. I think what he has had to cope with losing so many big players on a regular basis has not been easy for a team that isn't able to directly replace them and isn't a team that's completely full of star names either. They are his star 1 or 2 star players that get picked off every season, and all of a sudden he has to then work with a much stricter budget than most other teams up in that top 3 positions. But yet, year on year, he does it. So I still think he's the man for the job. I know a lot of Lyon fans won't agree with me on that, but yeah, I think he's done a terrific job. And yeah, I'm with Jen. I think they have all the elements here to certainly. I think second is well within their grasp. I'd probably have them finishing second this season. But I'm really looking forward to seeing how the likes of Ndombele and Aouar, who had such fantastic breakthrough seasons last year, how they now do with a little bit more expectation on them. Other players now know a bit more about them. Can they be as effective? Can they continue to progress? I've no doubt that they probably will, but it's going to be exciting to see just how far they can go this season.
Yeah, maybe need 1 or 2 more, I think, for me to definitely say those second. Another centre-back, someone extra for covering the midfield, and I think they might be really, really great to watch again this season. On to a team that's had a bit of a upheaval, to say the least, really, Adam, and that's in Caen. New man, Fabien Messadal in the dugout now, and a number of players in and out, really. Santini's gone, Ferre's gone, Damien De Silva's left, Basile, there's rumours that Gilbert is being linked with a couple of clubs. Income Ninga, income Crivelli, income Bamu, all kinds of strikers here, there and everywhere. Onyange's made his move permanent as well. It's going to be an interesting season for a side that really slid into danger last season. They've tried to throw every striker possible at this one as well. What are you expecting from Caen this season?
I think, although it's an interesting one because you said they sort of slid into trouble. That's kind of happened 2 seasons in a row, and what I'm expecting is that, to be fair, to be honest, more of the same. I think that yes, they've sort of made a lot of changes, and there's been a lot of turnover in terms of the playing staff. But although Santini in particular was a source of goals for them previously, and he sort of trailed off last season. I think, like a number of teams in their positions, scoring goals is going to be an issue. And if you look at what looks like it's going to be the front three of Crivelli and then Casimir Ninga and Yassine Bamu either side, I think those are three relatively solid Ligue 1 players. But I don't think there are many goals there. Enzo Crivelli coming through at Bordeaux, looked like a target man who could hold up the ball, but wasn't particularly a good finisher, and that continued into his spells at other Ligue 1 clubs. Casimir Ninga's, got pace and trickery, but again doesn't score too many goals. And Yassine Bamu has been around for a fair amount of time, even though he's 26. So he'll start as a striker, and then we're seen there's a Curran, I think, is more of a number 10 and played off the centre striker, has played wide and done okay, but by no means going to move the earth, and again is very, very sort of fristful with his goal scoring. So I think that the issues there are kind of going to be the same, just with different personnel. They've lost some experience obviously in Santini and Ferre, and some talented players as well in Eight Banassa, who I quite like, and Darren De Silva is important for them at the back, and Vincent Bassat's been around the league too. So there's a lot of turnover there, and it's whether in a similar case to a number of other teams we discussed already, whether those, Monaco in particular, whether those new additions can gel, and whether they are an improvement on the previous group. And I honestly don't think they are. I think it's a very similarly talented squad, and that similarly talented squad of previous years has slipped into relegation trouble and have been very lucky not to get relegated in the two previous occasions. Patrice Caron is a man who knows this league relatively well, and is someone who's proven himself as, if not a supremely talented coach, but a solid Ligue 1 operator nonetheless, and has done well to keep what has been an average team in the league. So whether the new manager can improve upon that remains to be seen, and I think they'll be one of the teams that struggle this season. I like Onyonge. He's probably the pick of the signings for me in midfield in particular, but I don't know that there's going to be an improvement, and I think they'll face similar issues that they have in previous years, and it could be the season they go down.
I think one thing on Calm was they gave me, certainly anyway, one of my favourite stats from last season was that only 7 Calm players scored. They only found the net 27 times, and excluding own goals, that was only 7 Calm players that scored. And of the 27 goals, bear in mind one of these players is a centre back, Damien De Silva and Ivan Santini scored 15 of them, and they've both left this summer. I think if that's not got the alarm bells ringing, and we've seen them with the signings, but none of those. I'd be gobsmacked if between Crivelli, Bamu, and Ninga, if they get even 15 goals between the three
10
of them,
might be a stretch, to be honest.
Yeah, it's Yassine Bamu. They'll just roll out that. Well, he used to work in the PSG club shop. That's what they'll do with him. And I've kind of one of those teams I've earmarked as big problems, I think, this season.
Yeah, it's almost like they got the checkbook out, typed in Ligue 1 strikers and just clicked on as many that were available and took them all on, because they're not all going to fit in the team, and it's maybe just going to be a case of play one, doesn't work, play the other, doesn't work, play the other, and they'll rotate it all season long, and none of them will get any goals, and they may sink to the bottom of the standings, but we'll wait and see. Another team that's changed manager, but maybe a little bit more positively, having Claudio Ranieri sort of fizzled out last season at Nantes, and they've replaced him with Miguel Cardoso, who did excellently for Rio Ave in Portugal last season, finishing 5th and getting the Europa League points, and their highest ever points total ever with 51. They've brought in a couple of players. Fabio at fullback. Corinne has made his move permanent. Evangelista had the very strange Fortnite reveal video a couple of weeks ago. A couple of loan players also come in, Jez, that we mentioned at the top of the programme, that sound pretty interesting. Waris, we obviously know. Miazga's highly rated, did well at Vitesse last season. Boschilia we obviously know as well, and whilst he's not been quite the same since injury, maybe he's a positive influence, especially with Thomason going out of the door, really. What do you think to Le Canary this season? They're a bit changed, but is there positives to take?
I think there are. I think there's real unknowns there, but not a sort of a traditional favourite club of neutrals in France, because they've always played promoted really good football, and a lot of great players have come through them. But the last 4 or 5 years, there's really been nothing to write home about. And to be honest, this is the first season for quite a while that I sort of wish them well. And it's not only because they stepped in at the last minute for Brighton's sort of headline final friendly when Sporting reneged on their contract and they let Brighton win. But I think there's a little bit more excitement there. I think Cardozo is quite an exciting appointment, a little bit risky because he's only had one season at the highest level, but was obviously really impressed at Rio Ave and what he did there last year. And he's kind of set out his stall that he really wants to play entertaining attacking football, which we certainly haven't seen much of from Nantes the last few years. I'm guessing it's not always going to work. There could be a few heavy defeats there, but I think, again, I don't think they're going to be in any kind of relegation trouble. And if, as they have done for the most part the last few years, it's sort of around the middle of the table, possibly just hinting at European places, then at least do it by entertaining the neutrals a little bit. And I think they've got the potential to do that. I think Evangelista looks an exciting player. I think Rongier is, as long as he can stay fit, maturing into the kind of player that we all hoped he would be when he first came onto the scene. I thought maybe they were looking a little lightweight in the attacking third, if that's the kind of play that Cardozo wants to promote. But as you said, Juarez, has done a reasonable job before in Ligue. I think Bosquillo looked excellent at Monaco before his injury, and really has got a lot to prove there, and has got a wicked left foot on his day. So I'm sort of, for the first time in a while, I'm looking forward to watching Nantes play. They've still got a fantastic goalkeeper, and I've always liked Gigi. I think Diego Carlos did well last year. So there's the potential for a decent team there. And if he can get them all to click, as I said, I think there will be sort of growing pains. But if he can get them to click, at least they'll be fun to watch for once.
That makes all the difference, doesn't it? And the last time they took a risk on a manager in Conceição, it worked out pretty well. So hopefully Cardozo can fill in those steps, having also come from the Portuguese league. Another team that's looking upwards but has not done as much business as we may have thought of it is Marseille. Adam, there was rumours earlier this summer that a lot of their business is being held up by still the potential chase for Mario Balotelli. They have brought in one player at least, and that is the Croatian Kaleta Kar from Red Bull Salzburg. A decent deal. They did need a centre back as well, but that striker still haunts them. Is that their main goal? If they can get one in that they can feel like they can challenge for that second spot?
Yeah, I think it has to be. I think I'd love the Balotelli move to happen. I think it would just suit everybody and be such a huge sort of ongoing story for the league, especially if you can maintain the form he had at Nice. The Marseille fans would absolutely love an on-form Balotelli, and he suits the club. He suits the Velodrome. I can just see him, scoring goals in big games at the Velodrome and in a fantastic atmosphere and really sort of setting the league alight. If given that how he was at Liverpool, that shows how far he's come in French football, at least since then. So it would be a great signing, and just the romance of it, that would be great. But it looks like that's a deal that's going to rumble on a little bit longer and is by no means certain of happening. So can they rely on a combination of Germain and Mitroglou in his absence, or will they go and sign somebody else? I think that Mitroglou is a viable option at centre forward, given how the second half of last season progressed. Only thing with him is that he's not necessarily different from Balotelli, but he's I think he probably is quite different in Balotelli in that he's sort of a between the posts kind of player. He's only a finisher. He's not going to give you much more apart from that. in a similar way to Saint-Etienne struggled with Robert Berich. He's a very similar player when they had him as the premier striker. And whether that suits his team, with him being a little bit isolated, with Tuvan and Payet playing sort of wider, perhaps Sanson in there as well. Whether he's got support is been his main issue, and as well as the odd occasional completely ridiculous miss that he had last season. But he's an experienced guy, and he was good at Benfica for long spells, and he's capable of playing that role. So I think from their point of view, that if they don't get Balotelli, they wouldn't be wholly upset if they aren't able to fill that role with somebody else, and Mitroglou would sort of slot in. But as you said, they've only made that one signing at centre back, and we might even see a move to 3 at the back this season for Marseille, which I don't necessarily think is a good idea. They lost 6-1 to Monaco, I think, last season playing that setup, and that could be
and 5-2 to Bournemouth yesterday with 3 at the back as well.
Yeah, they were 5-0 down in 50 minutes as well, which is really quite something. So hopefully that won't continue from Marseille fans' point of view, but a striker, someone to score them consistent level of goals to compete with Tuvan's sort of goal tally would be useful, but that could yet be Mitroglou. So I think it's an important position for them, but they may have an answer already in the squad.
And that's the interesting thing going forward. It's been good that they've not had anyone rich that's tried to pull away Tovan, which has helped, or Gustavo, who both had excellent seasons. But at the same time, that if they do add a striker, say they've got a great manager in Rudy Garcia, they had that great Europa League run last season, but is the performances in those big games, like the final, like the games against the teams around them, that sort of define their season in the end, and that's where they're going to have to improve.
Yeah, they're going to have to get the mentality right, but I think mentality comes with a bit, a larger squad. I think they had a pretty small squad last season. I think they paid the price for not recruiting properly, both from a quality point of view, but also from a personnel and volume of players point of view. That there was 1 or 2 injuries and suspensions towards the end of the season, and they were having to bring in some pretty raw youngsters. That that would have played a part in those bigger games. There's a lot of things right about Marseille at the moment. The investment is obviously there. They're doing these projects to promote the club around the world. That's great. They've got a really good manager. They've got the basics of a very good team. They've got a brilliant stadium. They've got a fan base who seems to be on board with everything at the moment. Yet they're still failing to recognise that the squad isn't quite up to scratch yet. They have some really good players, but they need more. I need to put it in simple terms. It's great that they've identified finally that they needed a new centre-back, and that's been addressed. I still think they need another body in midfield. They definitely need a striker. I think they may potentially need cover possibly at left-back. And I could make an argument that they might need another centre-back as well, but it depends on how well you rate their existing centre-backs, which I don't particularly highly. But the base, the sort of bare bones of a really, really good, exciting project are there for Marseille. I think it's now up to the owners, the American owners, now to recognise that and think: do we now want to take that next step with this project? It's not going to take a lot. It's not going to take huge money, and it's certainly money that could be recouped very quickly. Their failure to qualify for Champions League football this season could play a significant part in the quality of those players coming in. Maybe Balotelli possibly wants that. It seems that he's eager to leave Nice, whatever. But maybe, considering what he's done the last 2 seasons, he thinks he is, immediately now Champions League worthy. Maybe that's possibly a reason for the hold-up, although I suspect it's more on Nice's side. But yeah, I think Marseille, they just need one or two signings, and all of a sudden, I'm talking about them in a similar vein to how I was talking about Lyon. And actually, this is a team that could, that second is definitely within their grasp, that they could push PSG, not severely, but certainly to a lot more than they have pushed PSG in recent times. And it's things like that surely should be the impetus for bringing those correct and quality players in. So So, I mean, if we come to the end of this transfer window and they still have not done that, then I have to question, do the owners know exactly where they're going with this project? On the pitch, off the pitch, it seems as though they have the right ideas, but on it, I don't know if they do necessarily. So it's a couple of weeks to keep an eye on Marseille and exactly who comes in, if anybody.
And just to finish off really on Marseille, Jez, is it surprising that they've not tried a little bit harder to bring other players in? We know obviously about the situation up front, but at the same time, I know as well they weren't going to spend as much as they did last summer, but not even a couple of loan deals to try and sort of fill out the gaps in the squad.
Yeah, I am surprised. I agree basically with everything Rich said there. That they had a great season last season, but it was a thin squad, and I mean, they weren't. I was going to say they got lucky with injuries. They didn't really, because they did have a couple of crucial ones at crucial times, and it felt like everything clicked for them last year. It was certainly a sort of. It felt a little bit like a club reborn in terms of the passion behind the club and the way the fans got behind the team. It was like the olden days, and I think it's really important for them to keep that going. And there were the poor results against the big teams, but there were a few other shaky periods that they sort of just got out of, and it doesn't take that much for it to sort of switch the other way. And we've seen before that Marseille fans can switch very quickly as well. So you'd have really thought that everyone behind the club would be kind of trying to ride the crest of that wave and bring in more players just to do not only maintain what they did last year, but to improve on it. I think that retaining exactly the same squad, which they showed last year, is a talented squad and can do a lot. But I do think it's risky because it takes a couple of players to lose their form. Even Thauvin, had such a great season last year. It wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that he sort of drops his level just a little bit, and suddenly those important match-winning performances are gone. And it's not only against the top teams, but they're dropping a few points elsewhere as well, and then they're suddenly losing touch with the teams at the top. So I am surprised that they are bringing in a little bit more backup to just be able to, even if it's to rest the top players when they need it, so that they're fresher for the bigger matches and the bigger challenges. Yeah, I'd have thought they'd have been doing more to just strengthen the squad.
Frustrating indeed, but there's still a couple of weeks left. Let's see if they can try and pull off some more chess moves ahead of the window shutting. On to Strasbourg now, and they had an ambitious plan, really, Adam, for their Ligue survival, at least anyway. They felt like when they do establish themselves a little bit more, they would push on. But this summer feels like very small steps in that direction, really, and you have to worry, having given last season they did flirt with relegation. Have they done enough really to push themselves to that next level and start establishing themselves, or have they maybe just made that sideways move to consolidate again?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a summer of more sort of consolidation, if not even sort of a step backwards. We talked about Hulu earlier in the pod and what a good player he was for them last season, and how important he was. To lose him and Martin Terrier, who were two of their standout performers from last season, and not really replace either of them in terms of quality, will probably be the sort of the telling factor if they start slipping towards that bottom three. And they were quite lucky to step last season with that 3-2 win over. Was it 3-2 win over Lyon? Is that what I'm thinking of? Yeah. With 2 games to go, that was basically the game that saved them. And prior to that, they'd only won once. That was the only game they won in the last sort of 4 months of the season. A 2-1 win over Troyes in February was their previous win before that, and they were pretty fortunate to get those 3 points, which basically get them in the league. So whether losing their two most dynamic and creative players in midfield and not really replacing them is something that they can survive remains to be seen. Adrian Thomason's come in, and he's a player I really like, and although he hasn't been at his best for a little while, he's potentially a very good player. I don't know if he's a make weight for Martin Terrier, to be honest, though, in terms of quality. There's been a lot of turnover in defence. Bakary Kone's gone, Folakoui's gone, Mangan's gone as well. Mitrovic is coming from Ghent, who I know our Belgian analysts at Football Red, I really like him. He was good there last season. Kone, okay, perhaps was treading water at Sunderland and in a very, very poor side, but he was good at Lorient when he was in Ligue. And so there are some positives there. Matt Sells is a good goalkeeper too. Although didn't really get much of a chance at Newcastle, again was well liked in Belgium. So there are some positives, but I'm just worried that the things that probably kept them up last season, Hulu's dynamism and Terrier's goals and Terrier's attacking play, have gone and they haven't been replaced, and that could easily be the thing that relegates them, which would be a huge shame because they're another team that are a real credit to the league. Brilliant atmosphere, one of the best in France, and it'd be a shame to see them have a poor year. But at the moment, I kind of feel like that they're on for a poor year, and unless they change things between now and the end of the window.
Yeah, I think they're hoping that there's 2 or 3 teams that are worse than them at the moment, unless they can bring some more bodies in before that deadline. Guingamp have an interesting up and down season, sort of stabilised in the middle in the end, Rich, under Antoine Comboiré, but it's been a frustrating summer probably if you're a Guingamp fan, losing Diallo, losing Grenier. There's the strange situation with Briand, who's left the club to join Montreal Impact. He wasn't guaranteed the things that the Canadian club said they would do, so he's not joined them. They've ended talks with him. He's without a club at the moment because Guingamp said he essentially cancelled his contract. They've brought in Nolan Roux, who did terrifically obviously at Metz last season, but at the same time losing that kind of quality and experience. Does that make you a little bit worried about their season ahead?
Not overly, because they seem to be a team that just find a way to stay up and actually stay up pretty comfortably now. I think ever since they returned to the top flight, it's been mid-table finish after mid-table finish, and they've never really been a team that have had any serious relegation fights that they've had to take part in. Gourvenec and now Comboiré just seem to get the best out of possibly some of the most limited resources in the league. What they have is an ability to identify a great deal. They pounced on the fact that Grenier was allowed to leave Lyon. They brought him in and have really resurrected his career. He was fantastic for them the second half of last season, scoring goals, creating goals, banging in the free kicks, everything that we have previously known and loved about Grenier. And ultimately then victims of their own successes that they then had to, he was then off in the summer in a move to Rennes. They've brought in Nolan Roux, got him on a free. Look at what he did with Metz last season. You would like to think that man for man, Guingamp are perhaps a bit, got a bit more quality about them. Well, perhaps now he's got. I mean, I've sort of been quite critical of Nolan Roux over the years, but he's clearly a confidence player. And although he was in a team that were rooted at the bottom of the table, he was still recognising, I've got a responsibility, lead the line, got those goals. And yeah, I think his confidence returns. So if he can keep that up in a team that's got slightly more quality, maybe, it would have been lovely to have seen what he could have done with Clément Grenier. Unfortunately, we won't see that. I've got no over. They're not going to be challenging for Europe. I don't think they're going to be, scrapping it come the end of the season for, in the relegation fight. I think they're going to be, as with every season, sort of come mid to end of March, they're relatively safe in the middle of the table, and it's another case of job done for probably the team that have written the book on how to come up and stay up but keep within your means and not do anything silly. So, they are a credit to themselves that they continue to do that, that the supporters, I've seen prime example I would use is someone like, you look at like Stoke over in the Premiership. They came up, they weren't playing particularly great stuff under Tony Pulis, but year on year they were surviving relatively easily. The supporters started to grow a little unrest. We want better, we want better quality. We want to be pushing for Europe. Pulis went, Hughes came in. Okay, a couple of years later, they're back down in the second tier. The Guingamp fans don't seem to be doing that. They seem to be happy, recognising, hey, you know what? We're one of the smallest teams to have ever graced the top flight. Yet year on year, we're showing that we can perform with the very best, and year on year we're staying in the top flight, and they're recognising that, you know what? Let's be happy with that. So I don't know. I don't have any concerns with Guingamp this season. I think that squad certainly has enough quality over. It's certainly enough, and maybe a few more teams within the division. So I'm fully expecting another satisfactory mid-table finish from Kombuware.
I've got a little inkling that the Brittany side might not be as good as they usually are, but last time I had that last season, they proved me wrong with about 3 wins in a row after that. So it's probably a good thing that I'm feeling that for their fans. We'll move on now to Nice, who it's been an interesting summer for them. Jez, obviously Patrick Vieira coming in to replace Lucien Favre, who's headed back to Germany to manage Borussia Dortmund, as we probably expected last summer. But anywho, the moves really, the worrying ones are out. Jean-Michel Seri's gone to Fulham, as has Maxime Le Marchand, probably less importantly at least. But Alisson Players joined Gladbach as well. There's Balotelli waiting essentially for his move away from the Alliance Riviera. Does that put some fear in the former France international? He's got a big job on his hands, and probably a bigger job than he expected.
Yeah, I think as things stand, I mean, as you said about Guingamp, I think I've said the last 2 or 3 pre-seasons that I worry for Nice because of the players that they've let go. But it really feels like they've barely brought anyone in this time. And as things stand, certainly in terms of attacking or in terms of a striker, well, I suppose at the moment they still got Balotelli, but assuming he's going to go, I'm just not sure where the goals are going to come from. Balotelli and Player leaving in the same summer is a huge loss. Seri was nowhere near the level that he was at the year before, but was still, you know, the main player there to make things tick. And although I think that the defense is looking a little bit stronger, I really like the addition of Arel, who I think is an excellent player. I mean, you know, it's a great opportunity for Vieira to show, you know, his stock as a manager, because I think he's got a tough job on his hands to I guess get Nice back around the European places, which I think is where they should be, and certainly on the form of the last few years where they should be aiming to be. But this feels like the weakest squad that they've had now for a good 3 or 4 years, and unless they bring players in the next 2 to 3 weeks, you know, Cyprien, Lise Malou, Saint-Maximin, they can all score goals, but that's not their main job, and it's a lot of responsibility to put on midfielders, albeit attacking midfielders, to get those goals. I think they really need a decent striker to make a go of their season.
I wonder if following his departure from the US, whether he's burnt his bridges with the Man City group, because if not, you just wonder, you know, has he had a conversation with them as to, you know, got any players that you perhaps want to send out on loan?
Well, when he first arrived, there was a lot of talk of Thierry Ambrose moving there, who did well, I think, at Breda last year on loan from City, but he's gone to Lens now. So yeah, I'd have thought that Man City has certainly got enough decent players in the background, but
yeah, I just don't know whether he's burnt his bridges with the Man City group following the way that he left. I don't know whether he left with enough of a blessing that they perhaps consider that kind of an offer or anything, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I've got some concerns for Nice. I mean, the volume of goals that Player and Balotelli got were crazy, that potentially he's just walked out the door with no replacement. So tough job, I think, for Vieira.
Yeah, not the ideal scenario for him to walk into in his first European job, at least anyway. But if he can turn it around, or if they can maybe just make a slight push for Europe this season, then they'll be delighted, I think, with that kind of return, with those players heading out the door. Interesting side again. this season who consistently are fighting above their means, Adam, is Angers. They've made some more interesting moves. They always tend to do quite well in the transfer market of bringing in some interesting players. They've got Ryan Adelaide on permanent move. Vincent Pajot's joined Manzala from Amiens. Bahoken, who did reasonably well at times for Strasbourg as well. They've obviously lost the big name that was Carl Toko Ekambi, but got decent money in return for that. Although they have subtracted him this summer, have they, by the additions, made up for it?
I think it's an interesting question. I think that you made an interesting point in that they've assigned some sort of potentially interesting players. Sort of Harrison Manzala was decent in spells at Amiens last year. You know, Vincent Pajot is a very solid Ligue and performer. Bahoken obviously scored that goal against PSG and had a solid season overall. Ryan Adelaide is a very, very good signing given how good he was on loan last year. But I'm worried that the standard of the squad has slipped considerably with Carl Toko Ekambi leaving, and the number of goals that they'll score that they need to sort of make up without him in the team is going to be a little bit prohibitive this season. I don't know they've got the players to cover that shortfall. And we were looking at Angers around Christmas time last year, and they were really, you know, they were struggling. And I think that Carl Toko Ekambi's sort of talismanic presence and his goals, more importantly, really sort of rescued them in the spring and dragged them away from safety. The key, aside from the transfer policy and the transfer dealings between now and the end of the window, for me is Stéphane Moulin. When Angers promoted, they sort of handpicked a few of Ligue 2's sort of standout players from perhaps lower teams. You know, Billy Keke Fonfonken was at Tours, I think, one of their better players, signed him. Chaiken Doy was at Créteil. They're one of their better players, and they sort of those two and a few others were sort of added. Roman Tamar as well, you know, came in a little bit earlier. From and I think Israel Traoré is at Brest perhaps as well. That's one of their better players, and those sort of Ligue sort of talented players sort of cajoled into a solid Ligue inside against sort of all odds. And the person that's ultimately down to is the management of Stéphane Moulin, and I think he's an extremely underrated coach, and he's managed to get the best out of this team with limited resources. You know, they have one of the smallest budgets in the league for 2-3 years now, and that's an underrated achievement. We talked a lot about Christophe Pélissier last year. But Stéphane Moulin has done that kind of very similar job with similar levels of resources and a similarly average team for multiple seasons. And it's going to be down to him to do that again this year. And you know, he got a new contract halfway through the end of the last season, which is a really solid move from the Angers hierarchy. And it's basically down to his sort of wily management to form a competitive team out of what looks like a squad that's decreased in quality, despite the fact there are some interesting league and signings in that sort of group coming in. I don't know that there's enough goals in this team. I don't know that Thomas Mangani is in the same form that he was at the beginning of last year and the end of the season before, when he was absolutely brilliant. He dropped off a lot, and he's well into his 30s. Well, he's 31. He's in his 30s now. Whether he can be the sort of guiding light that he was is another question. So I think this may be Angers' weakest season in Ligue, and they could be one of those teams that are hoping there are 3 worst teams in them in the league. And they've managed to rescue it the previous 2 years when they've looked like sort of dropping off the cliff, and Moulin's sort of tightened the ship and changed a few things, and it's worked. Whether he's got the talented players for him to do that again remains another question. I'm worried that it kind of looks like a Ligue 2 team at the moment. So interesting times ahead, and it could be a tough season for them.
Yeah, they're going to need every ounce of that Moulin experience that's happened in the last couple of seasons to really help them avoid a relegation dogfight. Let's circle back to a team that's going to be looking further up the table, really, Rich, and that's your side, Rennes, who, despite losing Yoris Gnagnon to Sevilla earlier this summer, net positive, really, this summer, and they look like they're going to sort of push for Europe. Some good players coming in, some good players still rumoured to be attempting to join the club. You're thinking Grenier Sibacho had an excellent season last season in Ligue 2. Damien de Silva was excellent at Caen as well. Do they feel a little bit stronger so long as they hold fire and losing anyone else this summer?
Yeah, I think I don't see anyone else leaving between now and the end of the transfer window. Letang has said that the aim is to be building up the squad. I think they just recognised that Gnagnon was very much a player in demand. And I think they also saw that, with Damien De Silva coming in, there was a replacement. It's perhaps not as good as Nyagnon, but I still think a very good signing nonetheless. Hugely experienced. So I'm in a weird position because I'm coming into this season feeling very confident about Rennes. I've really liked what they've done with their signings. I'm really liking the look of the squad. It seems as though they're sort of in a position now where they are doubling up in every position. They have a quality player, or somebody good enough to come into the team. If for whatever reason, they far. I personally think they exceeded what I was expecting last season. I was a little bit. I don't know what the word would be. I don't want to say disappointed, but downhearted, I suppose, with the Lamouchi appointment. I thought, oh, okay, this doesn't necessarily seem to be the big positive forward step that I thought, but I'm glad that I've been proven so very, very wrong. They got the 5th place. I wasn't expecting them to get 5th place. It was helped by a win over PSG, an unexpected win over PSG towards the tail end of the season. And yeah, they now go into this season. They got European football. That's obviously only going to help bring in a higher caliber of player. And I think the target again this season then is 5th place at least again. Why not look at pushing? If Marseille don't recruit those players to fill those gaps and obvious places and positions that they need to improve on, why not see about? I know there was a large gap, but why not see about closing the gap on them? Rennes have now got a very, very talented starting 11. It's a good blend of experience. It's a good blend of youth. It's a good blend of pace. Good blend of players who are really willing to sort of stick a tackle in. And yeah, we're coming into this season. There's positivity around the club. There's European football that obviously brings a good feeling to it. It's automatic qualification for the group stages. So we'll see what the season brings. I think there's a higher level of expectation, but I think the club have set themselves up that they can meet that expectation this season.
It's going to be hopefully exciting one for you, Rich. Hopefully it's not as boom and bust as it has been in the few seasons, but we'll hold fire on just confirming that at least. Yeah. On to another side that will be looking for Europa League football, and that's Bordeaux. Jez, it's been an odd summer for them. Internal fighting, Poyet going against the board. They've obviously got new owners coming in who we're not sure if they're going to give them plenty of money or no money at all, or if they're looking to maybe flip them in a couple of years. It seems to be every single rumour coming out, and they've only just about managed to sign someone in Kalou from Belgium. Obviously lost Malcolm eventually to Barcelona after they swooped in. But does it feel like they've done enough to push on this season, or will the turmoil and the fact they even played Younes Sankharé as a forward in sort of protest almost in the Europa League second leg they managed to get through? Does it feel like it might be a bit of another dysfunctional season for Les Girondins?
I'm slightly biased, but I think any team that's got Poyet as a coach can be automatically described as a bit dysfunctional. I think generally everything is about Poyet in Poyet's mind, and the sort of the funny business he's already been getting up to in pre-season suggests that there's going to be more of the same. To be fair, he's got a little bit of a point in that they really haven't done too much to bring anyone in. And at the same time, they've lost their main player, so I understand that there's a concern there. There seems to be a big distraction in terms of the sort of the buying out of the club, which is taking longer than it should have done. But yeah, I still don't feel that they're particularly stable as a club. And again, while I think they should have enough quality in there, I'm still sort of hoping. Not quite against hope. I still think he can do it, but it's been a couple of seasons now. I'm still hoping that De Preville, for example, can get back to his best. Camano in flashes is a decent player, but I still worry a little bit about them. Defense, I think Koundé is turning into a very good player, but Sabali, for example, who was really solid for them last year, there's constant talk of him leaving. He came close to signing for Napoli, but so the fact that they were more or less set on him leaving suggests that he could still make his way somewhere before the window closes. It still feels like there's some instability there. Plasil, I still think is a classy player, but the fact that he's still sort of their starting midfield or their go-to midfielder is a little bit of a concern considering his age. So I don't expect them to push on from what they did last season, and I would not be surprised if Poyet's not there this time next year either, or even by the end of the season.
Yeah, it does feel like he's a man even already teetering on the edge, and they're going to need to get off to a good start. But at least they're playing competitive football earlier than anyone else. Maybe that will give them a slight advantage. They'll play the Europa League game as well for their next qualifying round on Thursday. So good luck to them. Onto a promoted side now, Adam, and Nîmes, who obviously came up as second last season. They've got some interesting players and some solid moves that they've made this summer. We've mentioned one briefly on the Guingamp side of Diallo coming into the club. They have last season's top scorer in Ligue 2, Umut Bozok, obviously still at the club, potentially seeing if he can make the step up. They've brought in Baptiste Guillaume, they've put in Paolo Bernardoni as well in goal. Are they a side that are strong enough to stay up in Liga, even though they are having a bit of a dispute at the moment over the fact that their players will be receiving less win bonus this season? But have they got a chance?
They've definitely got a chance. I think I'm more positive about them than perhaps I expected to be coming into the season. I think when you look through their team, they've got some potentially exciting and talented players. You mentioned Umut Bozok, who got 24 goals in Ligue 2, which is no mean feat. 7 more than Aloui, who also plays for Nîmes, is his strike partner. He got 17, and they're the top 2 scorers in the league last year. Didn't win Ligue 2. Rons were way ahead at the top, but they've got goals in this team. The signing of Denis Bouanga is a huge coup, given how good he was at Lorient last season in Ligue 2. A number of Ligue sides were looking at him, so there's in those 3 players they've got exciting attacking and potentially goal scoring potential there. You look in midfield, and Patrick Valverde is a player that's been around for a long time in France, not particularly experienced in the Ligue 1. It was one season with Lens when they finished bottom, but is a solid performer. Is very good last season in Ligue 2. Mustafa Diallo, I think, is a solid signing. I liked him at Guingamp, and potentially very, very good, and fits into this team quite well. So Savernier is a good sort of midfield creator, and was very good in Ligue 2 last season. Arguably, definitely a standout midfielder. And looking for a defence, where like Lens was again at Lens, and he's a name that perhaps some Ligue 1 fans recognise, and was highly sought after for a time. Didn't really work out for him in Italy, but could fit well into a promoted Ligue 1 team. And I like Paul Bernardoni in goal. He's at Bordeaux, and was actually looked at by Chelsea at one point, I seem to remember, bizarrely, and was very good at Clermont last season after making a few mistakes for Troyes, I think, when they were in Ligue, and still very young, 21, but was good at Clermont, and he's a really interesting signing too. So there's potential in this team, but whether there's enough talent overall to stay in the division is open to debate. But I definitely think they'll be amongst the sort of Caen, Angers, those sort of sides, and could easily outmuscle them with the goal scoring and attacking talent that they've got in the team. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they get on. I know that a number of people, Nîmes and Montpellier fans in particular, are looking forward to what will be a pretty feisty derby. And it's great to have another sort of derby with a little bit of needle in Ligue 1. So that's to look forward to, and I think they could be an interesting addition. And hopefully they'll score some goals and cause some upsets, and they've definitely got a chance of staying up.
Always good to have a new derby in Ligue 1, and maybe the third Olympique team can do some damage this season. But moving on to a team that did do some damage last season, having come through the ranks of second in Ligue 2, Richard, is Amiens. it does feel like a worry this season, though. They obviously gave Kuta's headed back to China. They've lost Manzala. Other players have also gone out of the door or returned from their loan spells, and they've only brought in a few more players. Ganhori on loan from Palermo. Other than that, not much brought in. Given the fact that they did fight above their weight considerably last season, do you really worry that their quiet summer puts them in danger?
It puts them in danger purely for the old cliche of the second season sort of syndrome. I mean, what they achieved last season was so far beyond what anybody predicted. I think you asked 99% of all French football writers where would they predicted Amiens to finish, and I think they'd have all said, "Yep, rock bottom." So to have achieve what they did was absolutely sensational, and to achieve it in the manner that they did, not many teams come up and stay up by virtue of having a rock solid defense. It was only I think was it the fourth or fifth best. I think it's fourth in terms of goals conceded, which I think is just It's ridiculous for a newly promoted team. Bearing in mind that 2 seasons before that they were in the 3rd tier. So the fact that they have retained the bulk of that defence is key. I think for the time being, the fact that they have retained Moussa Konate is key. I think they would have liked to have secured some kind of deal to keep Kakuta. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen, because he was another important player in midfield that provided a good link up between defence and attack. They do need to look at creativity. I think it would be wrong necessarily to go into this season relying on that defence again. As good as the likes of Regis Gertner in goal were, it's going to be a little bit tough on them to be relied upon again for a second season. Now everybody knows about Amiens and knows how they play and what are their strengths. More importantly, now teams know what their weaknesses. So I think they need to add a bit of pace. I think they need to add a bit of creativity in that midfield. I think they need to add a bit more support for Konate. First of all, they need to keep hold of Konate. But yeah, add a little bit of support for him. So I don't think that they should be viewing that their summer transfer deals are over with yet. I do think they will naturally, I think, find this season far tougher. I fear for them. I have them as a finishing in the bottom 3. Whether it's enough to finish 17th or whether they do go automatically down or not, we'll see. But yeah, I think they need 1 or 2 at the very least additions to that squad if they're to go into this season, sort of continuing that good feeling from last season.
I do worry for them, and that, like you said, that second season syndrome always seems to sink in, especially when you've got such a budget like Amiens. A side that will hope that they don't have the same kind of season as last season, especially the first half of it at least, will be Saint-Etienne. Jez, again, they've made some decent moves this summer. Obviously, there's still question marks about what will be sort of managerial wise, but it looks like Jean-Louis Gasset will continue. Got a couple of players in, Kolodziak, obviously at right back. Wabi Kazri's joined. They've got a couple of players that have signed longer deals, like Yann Villa, who obviously impressed. Lost a few right backs. Lost a good player in Bamba. They look like they're still trying to fight to get Cabela back into the club as well. Do you expect them to be more of the side that we expect from Le Vera of a Europa League challenger this season, rather than the sort of dysfunctional side that we saw last campaign?
I think so. I mean, they've as you said, sort of shed quite a lot of, I was going to say dead weight, maybe that's a bit harsh, but it feels like a bit of a leaner squad, but I think quite a talented one overall. And I certainly expect them to look more like the Saint-Etienne of the second half of last season, rather than the one of the first half. They've now got quite a solid sort of established back 4 or back 5, including Ruffier, although I think Debuchy possibly got injured this weekend, so there's a bit of a concern. And Villa, I wouldn't say is back to his very best, but looked slightly reborn, I guess, last season. And I still think that there's talent up front. Diony didn't have a great time at the start of last season or at Bristol City, actually, but it looks like he's found a little bit of form in pre-season. Hamouma, I think, has been consistently one of the more underrated players in Ligue 1 for a while now. And Khazri is mercurial, but we know that on his day, as he showed at times for Rennes last year and during the World Cup as well, is an extremely talented player. So I certainly expect under widely coached like Gasset, a lot more consistency. I think Kolodziak is a fantastic addition. I've missed him in Ligue 1. I think he was a really good player. So yeah, I think that they'll, again, not necessarily challenge for the top three, but certainly should be in the sort of challenge for Europa League places, and certainly should not have any of the kind of I guess heart flutters that they had during the first half of last season.
I really hope that they don't quite have the sort of gasket fire that they had last season. They did really recover really well, but they do need to maintain that up and coming season and get themselves back into those European spots, certainly. On to the final team this evening, and the 20th club in Ligue 1 will be the Ligue 2 champions in Reims. Obviously a couple of years away from the spotlight, but back there now. Adam, the worry for them, though, is they lost the two big contributors for the title last season in Sibacho, who's headed to Rennes, and Rigonato leaving the club as well. Does that put the fear in you that they maybe don't have enough, and that looking at the transfer so far, they may not have brought in the names to replace what was essentially their backbone?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The backbone of this team has kind of been sort of stripped away. And you mentioned two players there in Rigonato and Sibachu, but you also look further back and you look at Denilson de Cruz, who was a sort of almost ever-present defensive midfielder, and Julien Janvier, who's gone to Brentford, was their sort of premier centre-back alongside Adel Hamid. So, this team has had its sort of key performers really stripped away, and Rigonato is a huge loss. He's a player I really liked when they were in Ligue 1 before, and he's a sort of a Laurent Robert type of player in that he's all free kicks and corners and crosses, but he does that job really, really well, and he could have been a really good creative influence in Ligue 1 for them. And Sibachu in particular as well is a player that sort of broke into the team when they were last in Ligue 1 and has really developed in Ligue 2 and deserves his move to a bigger club and could be really dangerous for Rennes this season. And they're looking at the likes of Grosjean UK, who came through with Sibachu, hasn't really realised the same potential, and he might be expected to sort of fill the gaps that left by him. I don't know if he's able to do that. Tristan Dingon was coming from Troyes, who was okay in spells for them last year before he got injured. But again, I don't know if he's going to replace De Cruz. And perhaps Thomas Fontaine in defence from Clermont, who was very good there last year too, is sort of replaced Janvier. But again, there's no legal experience between the pair of them. But it's still an issue from him coming up into Ligue 1. So I like Reims as a club. They're a very historic team, and I was fortunate enough to go to their training ground when they're in the league previously, and they've got great facilities. They've got great youth development. They're a really great club, and I hope that they'll be okay this season. But unless things change between now and the transfer window, I've got fears for them. And without Rigonato and Sibachu and De Cruz and Janvier, those are players that even Youssef Kone was very good, gone back to Lille before he got injured. Around Christmas time was very good. So this, I don't know if they're the team that won League 2 by 15 points last season. They're a team that could quite easily struggle, and I'd argue that they're possibly even the weakest team in the league going into the campaign, which is a shame. But hopefully that things can change between now and the end of the window, and they can bring in a little bit more league and experience and a bit more quality in attack. But that might be the key for them. David Guillon's got a tough job on his hands, but he's done really well to develop his team from a relegated side into a runaway League 2 victors. Whether he can keep them in Ligue 1 is going to be a very different matter, though.
Absolutely. You do start to worry when any side starts selling off their best players before a start of a campaign. If they can't bring them in with an attraction of someone else following through the door, you do really have to worry for them. But that's all that we have time for this evening. My thanks to Adam, Rich, Jez, and all of you listening at home. There's no preview show this week, so do tune in for us next week on Thursday for that. But We also have the Get Football Mercato show for its final week as well. It will end on Thursday. But remember that the main show will be back here at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt and goodbye.